Bum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-da-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum.
Welcome to Everyday Musicality, the podcast in which we discuss all things related to Gordon's music learning theory and how it can help unlock the inner musician that lives inside of all of us. I'm your host, Heather Scholdeis, music educator and faculty member for the Gordon Institute for Music Learning. In this episode, I talk about tonal skills learned at the partial synthesis level of the skill learning sequence. Hello and welcome to the Everyday Musicality podcast. Today I'm going to continue the mini-series of episodes on the partial synthesis skill level of the skill learning sequence by talking about tonal skills learned at the partial synthesis level. If you haven't been listening to this mini-series, I suggest you first go back to the previous two episodes. Number 60, I talked about the partial synthesis level, just kind of in general, talking about the general gist of partial synthesis. I didn't intend for that to rhyme. And then in episode 61, I talked about rhythm skills that can be learned at the partial synthesis level. Today, we'll talk about tonal skills. You'll probably notice a lot of similarities between the tonal partial synthesis skills and the rhythm partial synthesis skills I talked about in the last episode because the goal is the same. Students are now learning at partial synthesis to audiate patterns in chunks or in series of several patterns linked together and beginning to learn to discriminate between different contexts that they're auditing for those series or chunks of patterns. In the previous episode, I shared examples where students are comparing duple and triple and learning to discriminate between those two meters. In today's episode on tonal partial synthesis, we'll look at activities we could do where students are learning to compare major and minor tonality and discriminate between those contexts. And of course, remember, those are just the starting place. We could do partial synthesis again later on, but with other tonalities or other meters. No matter what two tonalities you're comparing, in tonal partial synthesis, the students are using the tonal audiation skills they've previously developed at the aural level and the solfege and labeling skills they developed at the verbal association level. And at partial synthesis, they're beginning to learn again to compare and discriminate between the two tonalities. Remember, I've also mentioned in the previous two episodes that unlike verbal association, where students are learning to perform patterns with rhythm syllables or tonal solfege, at the partial synthesis level, solfege is not used to perform the musical material. So we don't sing the series of patterns on solfege. Instead, the series of patterns is performed on neutral syllables, and we use solfege as a tool for recognizing and naming tonality. Of course, because partial synthesis is a discrimination level of learning, the teacher does need to make sure that they give the answer. They need to start by modeling the prompts, whether that's a series of patterns performed on neutral syllables, or that could be a song that's performed in two parallel tonalities. The teacher performs that prompt and models the process of using solfege to discriminate between the two tonalities for the students. In that way, they are being given the answer. They have the opportunity to learn by rote. Then the teacher can perform the prompts for the students to discriminate between the two tonalities. Can the students recognize which tonality is which and apply the proper label to the context? Now, especially for tonal partial synthesis, it's important to be very thoughtful about how we are teaching students to discriminate between the two tonalities. In music learning theory, we use solfege as a tool for discriminating between the sounds of the two tonalities at the partial synthesis skill level. And we use solfege as the tool because it directly connects to our audiation of tonal context. We don't advocate that you teach students to discriminate between major and minor by something like saying, major sounds happy and minor sounds sad. There are several reasons why in MLT-based instruction we tend to avoid those crutches. One is that they are culturally learned and they are context specific. Those things, that association of major sounding happy and minor sounding sad, are not universal or inherent in the music itself. They are context specific, so felt within a culture, and we typically ascribe those meanings to music. So that it's not built into the music itself. There's also research that suggests that it's really not the tonality so much that really gets us to think happy versus sad. It tends to be more the tempo, or something referred to as the arousal level. So it's possible to sing a tune in minor tonality and do it, upbeat and peppy and have it actually sound kind of happy. It's just that we tend to, for those minor tonality songs that we think sound sad, we tend to also slow the tempo down, which is why, in case I forget to say it later, we have to be very conscious when we're doing partial synthesis tonal to not slow down our minor prompt. We have to perform both the major and the minor prompts with the same pacing, so we don't inadvertently give students a clue. We want students in MLT-based instruction to be using their audiation to sense the difference between major and minor. And furthermore, another reason why we don't rely on those crutches like happy versus sad is, what do we do when we're adding in tonalities like Dorian or Mixolydian or, heaven forbid, Locrian? Are we going to have a mood that we ascribe to each of those? And if so, how the heck are we going to teach students to feel the same thing? And really, ultimately, doesn't teaching students to all feel the same thing to music sort of go against the spirit of what music is? That we can have our own interpretation of how music makes us feel and what we're expressing through music? I don't know. That was just a little musing there. You might disagree. Feel free to send me an email at everydaymusicality@gmail.com if you disagree. But backing up, again, the bottom line is that we want to use solfege as a tool because in MLT-based instruction, we have each tonality with its own unique resting tone syllable, its own unique tonic pattern. And so by learning those sounds with the syllables associated to them at the verbal association level, students can start to use those sounds and syllables as tools to discriminate between different tonalities at partial synthesis. Another important thing to remember when you're doing tonal partial synthesis is that we want the prompts to be in the same keyality or the same key. We want to have the same tonal center, the same absolute pitch. So we wouldn't want to perform the major prompts in F major and then the minor prompts in D minor because students would just start to assume that minor is lower. We want to perform the major and the minor prompts in the same key or the same keyality. So if we're going to sing an F major, we want to sing an F minor so we don't give extra clues. We want students to use their audiation to tell the difference. But of course, doing parallel tonalities, switching back and forth between major and minor, can be challenging for the teacher, which is, again, I've mentioned this in previous episodes, why I've never been bored a single day of my teaching career, teaching with music learning theory, because it pushes me as a musician in new ways. So it's a good kind of challenge for the teacher. But we do have to be conscious of that because we might notice if our students are tending to give the wrong answer, it could be that they weren't ready for tonal partial synthesis, or it could be that maybe we're not performing the prompts with as accurate intonation as we had hoped. So if this is happening to you, you might consider recording some of your teaching, either video recording or just audio recording, to see if your singing was as accurate as you had hoped it was. So let's get into a few examples, and I'll hope that my intonation is accurate. So the most basic way that we can have students learn and practice the skill of comparing and discriminating between tonalities at the partial synthesis level is by using a series of tonal patterns. Usually this series of tonal patterns is made up of 3 individual tonal patterns performed in succession, with a very short pause or a very short breath in between. I personally don't like to stop and insert a breath in between each pattern. Other teachers do, so it's up to you. Just be careful. You don't want to have a long pause in between the three patterns. You want students to be able to sense them as a greater whole, and including too long of a pause in between the patterns might break up that sense of a wholeness, the sense of context that the three patterns in succession should be making up. So here's an example. Hello, class. We've been learning about the difference between major tonality and minor tonality. We hopefully remember that in minor tonality, mi, fa, mi, re, do, ti, si, la, the resting tone is la for minor tonality. And hopefully we remember that for major tonality, sol, la, sol, fa, mi, re, ti, do, the resting tone is do in major tonality. Today, I'm going to be singing some patterns for you, and your job is going to be to see if you can tell whether those patterns are in major tonality or minor tonality. I'll show you first. First, bum, 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 bum. Second, bum, 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 bum. The first set of patterns you should have been audiating in major tonality because the tonic was do, mi, so. Listen to it again. Bum, 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 do, mi, so. Those patterns were in major. The second set of patterns were in minor because the tonic was la, do, mi. Here's the second set again. Bum, 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 bum. La, do, mi was the tonic, so that second set was in minor tonality. So this time, I'm going to sing one of those series, and your job will be to decide if you're audiating do, mi, so for major or la, do, mi for minor. Let's try some. Bum, 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 bum. What did you audiate for the tonic? Do, mi, so was the answer, so those patterns were in major. How about this one? Bum, 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 bum. What was the tonic? La, do, mi was the answer, so those patterns were in minor tonality. That's right. Let's try one more. Bum, 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 bum. What was the tonic? La, do, mi. So those patterns were in minor again. I thought I could trick you by doing it again, but I couldn't. Now this time, I might ask individuals to sing the tonic pattern they were audiating. So let's listen to the patterns and see if I ask you to sing the tonic pattern that you're audiating. Here we go. Bum, 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 bum. What was the tonic? If you said do, mi, so, you were right. I'll prove it to you. Let's try this. You're going to sing do, mi, so with just the first pattern in that series, and then you're going to stop. Let's see if it fits. Try singing do, mi, so, and stopping. Bum, 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 bum. Did it fit? Yes, it did, because those patterns were in major. Just for kicks, try singing the other tonic pattern. Try singing la, do, mi while I sing the series this time and see if that one fits. Ready to sing la, do, mi? Bum, 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 bum. It didn't fit. Ugh. So the patterns were in major, but when we sing the minor tonic, it does not sound good. And then I would carry on in a similar way, either asking the group to sing the tonic pattern that they audiated or going to individual students to say to sing the tonic pattern they were audiating. And then I might ask other students if they agreed or disagreed with the first student who sang the tonic pattern. And then I might ask a student eventually to name the tonality. Really quickly, just backing up, my little mistake there when I said speak the tonic pattern instead of sing it reminds me this is a good time for us to remember that when we're using tonal solfege, we should always be singing it if we want students to be learning the sounds. So at verbal association, we should always be singing do, mi, so. And at partial synthesis, we should be helping them sing do, mi, so. No, there was recently a post in one of the MLT groups on Facebook where somebody said, "Can I get an amen about making sure we sing solfege and not speak it?" Because otherwise it kind of defeats the purpose of solfege, right? The whole purpose of solfege is to give us something tangible to attach to pitch so that we can retain it and we can talk about pitch relationships like function and tonality. But somebody else made a good point. Andy Mullen had commented, well, sometimes it's helpful to speak the solfege to students and ask them to sing the part that you spoke to see if they can find the pitches independently. That's a different matter. That's a different skill being practiced. So that would be great, for example, if we're having students start to bridge to generalization, to see if you could say to them, do, mi, so. Could you sing it? Right? And then have them sing, do, mi, so. Or I also use that as a tool for creativity improvisation. Sometimes you'll give a pattern and the student's job is to come up with a different pattern. Like if I were to sing, so, mi, do, and a student might try to improvise back, do, mi, so. And then I would stop and say, but if you wanted do, mi, so, you got to change the sound, right? How would that sound if we wanted do, mi, so? Do, mi, so. And I find that that helps students learn to navigate putting the pitches to the syllables. Because yes, some students come up with the sounds and then almost instantaneously attach the solfege to the sounds they're audiating. But some students work in reverse. They come up with the syllables and then they try to find the sounds. So speaking the solfege in that case can be a valuable tool. But for verbal association, for partial synthesis, we want to make sure we're always singing the solfege, not speaking it. Now, back to partial synthesis. So I modeled the two series of patterns, and I explained which one was major, which one was minor, and why. I sang the tonic pattern that fit with each series. And then when I had the students respond, I had them answer by singing the tonic pattern they were audiating with solfege. Now, there's different ways you could do this. You could just have the students name major tonality or minor tonality at the end of the prompts. You could just say, what tonality were you audiating? But sort of like I talked about in episode 61 on rhythm partial synthesis, they have a 50-50% chance of guessing and getting it right. What I want to make sure of at this point is that they're audiating the context. Even if they get the names confused still, I want to make sure they're audiating the tonal context. So I like to have the students sing back the tonic pattern at first, do, mi, so, or la, do, mi, because if they can sing back the correct pattern with the correct solfege, that proves to me that they're audiating versus just guessing major or minor. Similarly, you could have the students respond with a resting tone. You could just have them sing do, or you could have them sing la. But kind of similarly, they could, as long as they're audiating the resting tone, if they're not audiating the context, they could kind of 50-50 guess to sing it on do or la. So I choose to start by having them sing the tonic pattern at first, but then later on in classroom activities, I do have the students do some where they're singing the resting tone with the solfege syllable to give their answer for which tonality they're audiating. So that's not an out of the question thing to do. Just for myself, I liked to make sure initially that students really were audiating the context. And the best way I thought for them to prove it to me was to sing either do, mi, so, or la, do, mi. And maybe a student occasionally would speak it. Maybe they would say, la, do, mi. I might just say back to them, can you sing it? And then see if they could sing la, do, mi. And if they could, then it proved to me they were audiating. If they spoke it, it could be they're audiating, but they haven't found their singing voice yet. Still, there may be some occasional stragglers who still are, trying to connect their audiation to their voice. So it might not be that they're not audiating if they were to speak la, do, mi. But, I might just kind of keep my eye on that student to see, maybe go back to them later to see if they really truly seem like they're audiating versus just guessing. And then I think I mentioned this in the previous episode for rhythm partial synthesis. When we're doing learning sequence activities, remember that's that focused kind of pattern instruction. I've done an episode on learning sequence activities in the past. You can go look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about. We call them LSAs for short. But Just to make sure I'm doing my due diligence, I want to be clear in the learning sequence activity for tonal partial synthesis. We are actually told by Gordon to perform the 2 series in a row and have students then label the tonality. So to sing, sorry, I was going to do it with the solfege. That would not be correct. Let me try it again. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. What was the tonality for the first one? Right? And then etc. But I found kids' attention spans just are not that reliable in my experience. And by the time I get done singing the second set, some kids have already forgotten the first set. And so rather than have them guess, which to me that's not the point of partial synthesis. It's to see if they're audiating the context. So that's why I broke it down, and I would have students do one at a time for a while. And then when they seem pretty comfortable, I might start pushing them and say, okay, now I have a real challenge. And then I might do 2 in a row. And then a quick note, I think I modeled really quickly at the end there when I was singing the series of patterns. You might ask students to prove it. If they think it's do, mi, so, you could have them try singing that tonic pattern with solfege during the first pattern of the series, because it just so happens the patterns I was singing are from the first tonal partial synthesis page in learning sequence activities, T6A1. And the first pattern in the series is bum, 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 that arpeggiated tonic pattern going upward. And so for their first try at partial synthesis, I'll sometimes have them then sing the tonic pattern that along with me singing the first pattern in the series, and then I finish the series as a way to prove if it fit or not. I just don't always do it that way because I don't want students to assume that a particular pattern has to be in the series. It just so happens that in this series, that is the first pattern, exactly like that. So I found that to be a convenient way of having students sort of double check their answer, since this is their first experience with partial synthesis. Also, back at verbal association, after they'd been doing verbal association for a couple of weeks, I would start to invite them to try singing the sequence of tones with me. So I might play a tonic pattern on the piano and say, what was that big long thing that goes with major? It starts on so. Try singing so, la, so, fa, mi, re, ti, do. And similarly with minor tonality, after we'd been doing minor tonality at verbal association for a few weeks, I might prompt them, what was that big long thing that goes with minor? It starts on mi, fa, mi, re, do, ti, si, la. Try singing that big long thing for minor, mi, fa, mi, re, do, ti, si, la. And the big long thing that goes with major or minor is not necessarily a good technical term, but they know what I'm talking about. Versus if I called it sequence of tones, that's just one more label to have to try to remember. So I just say, what's that big long thing that goes with major? What's that big long thing that goes with minor? I know, not technically, theoretically correct, but it works. And so if the students are starting to pick up on that at verbal association, that sequence of tones can also be a tool that they could use to differentiate between major and minor at partial synthesis. And then one more note, just because we want to make sure that students aren't using any sort of cheat to determine whether it's major or minor, like being in a higher or lower key, or we wouldn't want to sing bum 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 and slow it down, because then students will pick up on that. And it's sometimes it's hard for us to notice if we're slowing down. So you might want to record yourself a little bit. I hope in this episode I didn't slow down. I'm not going to go back and check right now because I don't have time to record all over again. But you want to try to perform them again at the same pacing. And then another thing where you might inadvertently be giving the answer is if you're always going to alternate between the two. So if you're giving them 2 prompts and it goes major, minor, major, minor, or then you might start to do minor, major. Well, they might start to figure out that the second one will always switch from whatever the first one was. So, throw in some curveballs, maybe do them both in major or both in minor. Or after a long while, you might throw in, you might do the major one and then do like a Lydian one or something, just to mess with the students and show them that there's stuff you haven't taught them yet. So that would be using a series of patterns in two parallel tonalities that you use to help students start to discriminate between the two tonalities. And of course, I made sure to model the answer. I taught it by rote in the very beginning, and then students recognized. That's really important because if you don't tell them the answer, they're generalizing, which is totally fine as long as you know you're generalizing, right? Also, you want to make sure in partial synthesis you don't add any prompts that you didn't model when you gave the answer. So we're not going to start to incorporate other patterns from major or minor, just the 3 patterns in that series so that you make sure it's familiar and the students are simply discriminating between the 2 contexts that you've already modeled with the exact same familiar patterns. One more way we could do tonal partial synthesis is to use a song. So we could take a song that's in major or minor, and we could perform it in major for the students and in minor for the students. And as we do, after we sing it in each tonality, we could model the tonic pattern with solfege and explain to the students what the tonality was and how we knew based on the tonic pattern. So that could be a song that the students haven't previously learned to sing, or it could be something that is familiar. My absolute favorite tonal partial synthesis classroom activity is using a song by my good friend and former colleague Jennifer Bailey, another Gimmel faculty member. Her song, Joe Doe. I'll sing it right now. It goes like this. Sol, la, sol, fa, mi, re, ti, do. I have a little friend, his name is Joe. The only thing he sings is the resting tone. He loves to sing all day, he sings so sweet. I only wish he'd sing more than this one thing. Joe, do. And Joe's song has the resting tone, do. So Joe's song must be in major tonality. So I used that song at verbal association for practicing singing the resting tone on do and labeling major tonality. Then Jennifer came up with another version in minor tonality. So I used this one at verbal association as well. It goes like this. I should establish tonality if we're at verbal association. Mi, fa, mi, re, do, ti, si, la. I have a little friend, her name is Mona. The only thing she sings is the resting tona. She loves to sing all day, she sings so sweet. I only wish she'd sing more than this one thing. Mona, la. So that's the minor tonality version. Oh, and Mona's resting tone is la. So her song is in minor tonality. So we would use that at verbal association for singing the resting tone on la and labeling minor tonality, of course, stopping in between phrases of the song. I have a little friend, her name is Mona, la. The only thing she sings is the resting tona, la. And of course, it's a little bit silly, but the kids think it's funny. I do have some other teachers I've encountered who use that song and they sing Joan as the name because her name is Joan. The resting tone rhymes a little more smoothly, but I like the silly version, so I do Mona. Okay, so let's say we learned both of those versions at verbal association, and now at partial synthesis. This partial synthesis activity was created by another good friend and MLT teacher, Yael Rothfeld, who teaches in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And this version, you wouldn't know the friend's name. So it might go something like this. I have a little friend, don't know their name. They like to change tonalities like a game. La. They love to sing all day, they sing so sweet, and tricking people is their little treat. Do. So this friend likes to switch back and forth between major and minor. So that's going to be your job today. We're going to hear part of the song for my friend. And you're going to see what resting tone you're audiating, do or la. Let's try it again. I have a little friend, don't know their name. They like to change tonalities like a game. Do was the answer, so that part was in major. They love to sing all day, they sing so sweet, and tricking people is their little treat. La was the resting tone that time, so that time it was in minor. Now let's toss the friend to some individuals. I have a little friend, don't know their name. They like to change tonalities like a game. la. They love to sing all day, they sing so sweet, and tricking people is their little treat. La, it was minor again. Yes. So again, not always doing back and forth between the two, but switching it up and doing two in a row sometimes. Also, sorry for the little bobble there with the lyrics, but I was thinking about how at first with the students, I just have them sing the resting tone, la, and then I would, for individuals, if they're getting individual turns, I might just confirm it was minor and then pass it on to the next student, do, and I might say it was major. And then if a student doesn't get it correct, I don't make a big deal out of it if it's incorrect. The only thing they sing is the resting tone, do. I might just say it was actually major, that's okay, and not make a big deal out of it, but just to make sure that I'm reinforcing the correct answer so students don't get confused. Now, when we're doing an activity like this where we're using a song and we're pausing at various points in the song to have the students recognize the tonality, whether that's singing the tonic or the resting tone or the name of the tonality, we need to make sure that the amount of data, the chunk that we're singing for them, gives them enough of the essential pitches, the characteristic pitches for that tonality to have them tell the answer. That's why for this particular song, I do it with an entire half of the song. I have a little friend, don't know their name. They like to change tonalities like a game. Because if I were to stop 4 times, they like to change tonalities like a game. In that phrase, there's actually only one pitch that's different between major and minor, right? That third scale degree. And it goes so quickly and it's so easy to sing it out of tune that I don't think it's fair to the students to have them answer with just that little amount of information. That's why I give them the whole first half or the second half of the song, because that does have characteristic tones for major versus minor several times. We also want to be conscious when we're choosing songs if there's enough of those characteristic tones to help students audiate the difference between the two. I learned this once. The activity worked okay, but I did an activity where the students had circles, and one said major and it was red, and one said minor, it was blue, and I would switch back and forth with the tonality of the song, and they would hold up the circle for the tonality they were audiating as I was singing, so that in this moment, they could switch circles if they heard me change tonality. It was really, really fun. But I've since realized that the song I had been using is maybe not the best song because it was Alabama Gal. Come through in a hurry, come through in a hurry, come through in a hurry, Alabama Gal. Come through in a hurry, come through in a hurry, come through in a hurry, Alabama Gal. Like I said, it worked okay, but I've since realized the majority of the song, come through in a hurry, bum, 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 could kind of have a little bit of subjective tonality if they're audiating maybe that 6th scale degree as home, because we don't get the 5th scale degree until the very end. So, you just might want to be careful when you're picking songs that you're using, that they have enough of those characteristic tones in them, or that they have enough of, for example, the resting tone in the 5th scale degree, that you really get the context clearly established, that it's very, very clearly objective tonality and couldn't be construed easily as subjective tonality. I talk more about this in my book, Weaving It All Together. I give examples of some songs that work well for tonal partial synthesis because of the way they're constructed. One of those is a tune, a melody that I made up for the chant Hickety Pickety Bumblebee. It goes like this: Hickety Pickety Bumblebee, can you name the tonality for me? That time the tonic was La, Do, Mi, so that time I sang the song in minor tonality. Listen to this time. Hickety Pickety Bumblebee, can you name the tonality for me? Do, Mi, so was the tonic, so that one was in major tonality. Now this time let's see if you can tell if the tonic is Do, Mi, so, or La, Do, Mi, and you're going to sing the name of the tonality that you're audiating when it asks you to. Hickety Pickety Bumblebee, can you name the tonality for me? Major tonality. And then I might ask another kid in the class, did you agree with them? Why did you agree with them? And they might say, because I audiated do, mi, so as the tonic. So that's an example of another song you could use that gives the students lots of those characteristic tones that they can use to discriminate between major and minor. Just beware, that song that I made up starts on the third scale degree, so it can be a little challenging to just open your mouth and have the context set. So just, I like to take a split second before I start singing to make sure I have the proper context in my audiation. Also, in my book, I have more ideas for how you could extend partial synthesis tonal into classroom activities using props, using manipulatives for students to indicate their answers, such as the circles that I previously mentioned. Or you could use a Hoberman sphere to discriminate between major versus minor, or a ball or a toy that you could toss from student to student. I'll link to my book, Weaving It All Together, in the show notes in case you'd like to check it out. I'll also try to remember to link to a page on my website where I believe I have posted the table of contents. So if you want to get a gist of what's in there, you can look through that before you commit to getting the book or not. And also, I'll try to remember to link to the book in ebook format. It is available as a Kindle ebook through Amazon. Once your students are starting to get comfortable discriminating between major and minor, another fun extension is to have them try singing a familiar song in the other tonality. So, for example, I like to use the song 5 Cents Have I. Ya da 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 ba da da dum ba da 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 dum. That's in Jump Right In Book 1. I like to use it. It's got a really clear harmonic progression, so it's great for minor tonality and chord roots in minor and lots of other stuff too, triple meter. And so I would have taught that song at earlier levels. Now at partial synthesis for kicks, maybe we might review it as we learned it in minor. And then we might say, oh, I wonder what that song would sound like in major tonality. And typically for this, I'll start by using chords on the piano. I'll chord along with the song originally in minor. And then I'll say, okay, this time let's try putting the minor chords to it and see what it sounds like. Sol, la, sol, fa, mi, re, ti, do. And I'll chord along with the song, but I'm in my closet, so I don't have a piano right now. Ya da 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 ba da da dum ba da 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 dum. And you just see their eyes get wide. They get so excited. They think it's so cool. Even my college students think it is so cool if to change the tonality of a song. If they've never done it before, their eyes just light up. They think it's amazing. So give that a try. Just be aware, I wouldn't expect students to be able to independently switch a song to a different tonality all by themselves. I think that would be more generalization, personally. But I could be guiding them. I might be chording at the piano, and I might be singing as well. So they're kind of just being pulled along for the ride. But a lot of them will be able to jump in and sing the song in the other tonality. It's so cool. I forget if I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I used to have a bulletin board in my room that I kept up every year because I was not the kind of teacher who loved making bulletin boards all the time. I wanted one that I could just use for teaching and learning that looked cute and I could just leave it up there. So I had this bulletin board where I did die cut cutouts on different colors of construction paper of a crayon. So it looked like crayons in all these different colors. And I made a cute graphic for the middle that looked like a crayon box, like a Crayola crayon box that said something like tonality brings color to music. And then I put the crayons with the different resting tones on them. So like red crayon might have do written, D-O, and so on. And then I would connect that with a colored line looking like the crayon had been coloring on the bulletin board. And then it would squiggle around to somewhere else on the board where it would connect to the name of that tonality. So a red squiggly line would come out of the red crayon that says do, and it would lead somewhere on the board to where it says red, and it would say major in red. So hopefully you can picture this. I'll see if somewhere I can track down a picture I have of this and see if I can link it in the show notes. So you might be thinking, first of all, Sholes, are you a hypocrite? I thought Gordon said to not ever have students see solfege. They should only hear it and audiate it. Correct, because we don't want it to be a crutch for audiation. But for this bulletin board, I don't think that it is acting as a crutch for audiation. It's just, a cute bulletin board. And also, I made sure to separate the resting tone from its tonality name, so the students couldn't just always glance up there for the answer when I would ask, if the resting tone is do, what tonality is it? Right? Because I've seen some people have like right next to each other, major, do, minor, la. I didn't want to do that because it's too easy to cheat. So that's why I did the crayon strategy of having it draw a line all over the board that would then connect with the tonality name, because they'd have to use their eyes to kind of scan around the whole board, and it would take a while. They couldn't just rely on that when I was answering, routinely during class, what tonality is it? Okay, so back to my story. This is getting long. One day, we had been doing something like this with the song Sarah Sponda. Sarah Sponda, Sarah Sponda, Sarah Sponda, rat, set, set. And we said, oh, let's try it in minor. Sarah Sponda, Sarah Sponda, Sarah Sponda, rat, set, set. And I was chording at the piano while we tried it. Well, then a kid raised their hand and said, what's Lydian tonality? Can we try it in Lydian? And I was like, okay. And we tried it. Sarah Sponda, Sarah Sponda, Sarah Sponda, rat, set, set. We tried it. And I was chording through on 1, 2, and 5 in Lydian. And then another kid raised their hand and said, what's Phrygian? Or, of course they didn't pronounce it correctly, but I said, it's Phrygian. And, oh, what does that sound like? Let's try it in Phrygian. They said, okay, let's try it. Sarah Sponda, Sarah Sponda, Sarah Sponda, rat, set, set. Oh! And I was chording 1, 2, and 7 in Phrygian, and so on. And eventually, oh my goodness, this must have been 3rd grade, because one kid then remembered we had just learned, at the time I was calling it unusual paired. Now I would call it uneven paired, but we had just learned that. And they're like, could we do it in Lydian and uneven paired? Okay, let's see. Sarah Sponda, Sarah Sponda, Sarah Sponda, rat, set, set. What? I mean, again, this is why I have never been musically bored or otherwise bored a day in my teaching life, because I was being challenged musically to guide them to try to sing in these different tonalities and meters, and I was chording along on the piano. So much fun if you can get to this point where you're having the students start to try messing with the different tonalities. Before I go, I want to again mention that the Gordon Institute for Music Learning Professional Development Levels courses, those are the 2-week courses held at various places around the United States in the summer. Those are live. The registration is open on the Gimbal website. I'll link to that in the show notes in case you want to check out the different sites that we're hosting, where those are, and the different levels that are being offered in the different specialization areas. So I'll link to that in the show notes. This is why I usually like to script. In the meantime, if you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, please get in touch. You can email me or send me a voice memo at everydaymusicality@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and let's keep musicking every day.